And welcome to our weekly live stream, coming to you from the Huckabee Theater in Hendersonville, just outside of Nashville, Tennessee, where we do our Huckabee show every week. It'll be airing this weekend, and you don't want to miss. Mark Meadows is going to be on our show this weekend. He's kind of been in the news just a little bit. The House decided to go after him and actually file a criminal indictment because he will not give up documents that are related to January 6th. Now, I want you to watch that interview because it's important that you realize he's not being obstinate. He's not even trying to protect himself. He's trying to protect the institution of the presidency, because if the members of one branch of government can tell the other branch of government that it must produce records that would reveal confidential conversations between the President of the United States and his Chief of Staff, then folks, we have destroyed separation of powers. That may not make a lot of sense to you, but as somebody who's been in government in the executive branch, I want you to understand this is a really, really, really big deal. And I'm so glad Mark Meadows is pushing back. In fact, he is actually suing Nancy Pelosi, which I find to be wonderful, because she has exceeded her authority and did not live up to even the very essence of what that committee is supposed to do. This is a very important battle. It's not about Donald Trump, even though the Democrats will certainly make it all about Donald Trump. But I want you to know, even if you hated Donald Trump, you need to recognize that if Mark Meadows were to lose on this, it fundamentally changes the office of the president, and it shreds a big chunk of the Constitution in doing it. So that's why I really hope you'll get a chance to watch the interview with Mark Meadows this weekend. We're going to have a wonderful show with Point of Grace doing some Christmas music, a lot more, but we're doing it right here in our theater. And by the way, this is where we do our live stream. Now, saying live stream means you can send in your questions, which we hope you will do. By the way, Pam Case, our senior producer for the show, is back. And I'm so glad, Pam, that you are back. You had a little personal time that you had to take care of.
Absolutely. Glad to be back.
We're glad. We kind of limped along with you not being over on the couch.
All right. Well, throw the crutches away. We're all good.
There we go. We got moderators watching the chat. And, of course, we'd like for you to subscribe to the channel. Hit that notification bell. You see it right there on the screen. Leave us a comment, a like, and, of course, be sure and share the page with all the people that you know so that they will join you for the chat. We're going to get into your questions here momentarily, but I want to begin today with just sort of a review of Joe Biden, who has mentioned at each of the stages in which COVID deaths have happened in the country. And before he became president, when we were at virtually 200,000 deaths, Joe Biden was basically blaming Donald Trump for the deaths as if he had gone out and injected people with some kind of poison and killed them. And this went on until the election. And then he began to talk about how we're going to get it under control. Well, the truth is we've had more people die from COVID this year than last year. So if it's true that the President of the United States is personally responsible for the deaths, then Joe Biden has a lot to own up to. But he's not. In fact, this is an interesting moment. Now, keep in mind, for months, Joe Biden has sort of dwindled and dwindled in his willingness to talk about how many deaths there are. We are now at 800,000. And as he was walking to the helicopter at the south lawn of the White House, a reporter asked him, does he have any responsibility? Will he hold China responsible? I want you to watch his reaction to this.
Biden on 800,000 coronavirus deaths. If you have a statement on your responsibility, why haven't you asked China to do more to be transparent on the origins?
I mean, that's as flippant a response as I've seen. He smiles like 800,000 deaths, what's that to me? And walks away. No answer, nothing. A smile and a wave, and a dismissive wave, like, get out of here, I don't even want to hear it. Well, I just wonder, is any other reporter going to hold him accountable? Not just for what's happening with COVID, but for his attitude and for the massive change in attitude that he's had. There's also some serious misinformation that the Biden administration is putting forth. I don't guess it'll get him canceled on social media are hit by the fact checkers, which that's a joke to call somebody a fact checker, mostly in the media. They're not. But Joe Biden has been spreading some COVID misinformation, claiming that vaccinated people can't spread and don't spread the disease. Watch.
And so everybody talks about freedom and not to have a shot or have a test. Well, guess what? So how about patriotism? How about making sure that you're vaccinated so you do not spread the disease to anybody else? What about that? What's the big deal?
Yeah, what about that, Joe? I mean, the fact is, you're saying that people who are vaccinated can't spread the disease, but your own Centers for Disease Control and the immortal Dr. Fauci says that you can. So somebody's not getting it straight. You tell us to follow the science, you can't even follow the script. Here's another example. This is the Assistant Press Secretary, Katrina Jean-Pierre, and a reporter confronts Karine Jean-Pierre on Biden spreading this misinformation. Her answer is stunning. Watch.
Why is President Biden telling people still that the vaccinated cannot spread COVID?
Can you say more?
Yeah, in a local interview on Tuesday, he said, how about making sure you're vaccinated so you do not spread the disease to anybody else? The CDC says people who get vaccine breakthrough infections can be contagious.
Well, I'll say this. I didn't hear this interview, so I would have to see it in its full context. What I know and what the president believes is that we have to listen to the science.
Boy, that's on two fronts, it's amazing. Number one, she says, I didn't see the interview. That's nonsense. When you're the assistant press secretary, believe me, I know this from my daughter having been there, unless they have some complete incompetent idiots running the White House press operation. They saw that interview. They know what the president says. The press office knows when the president goes on television, and they all watch it because they need to know what he says, because they know they're going to have a moment like this. So that is simply not true, unless she was, I don't know, whisked away by a Martian spacecraft and just got back and landed. And if so, then she shouldn't be at the podium. But here's the other part of that. When she said, we just have to follow the science. What science are we following? This is where we're confused, because either we can spread COVID as vaccinated people, or we can't. Science is supposed to be so clear, right? Well, it's not. And that's why a lot of Americans have had it up to here with all this talk about what the science is and how we've got to follow it, because our government officials who are giving us these orders and mandates, they don't know what the science is. They don't follow it. How the heck should the rest of us do it? Are we getting some questions?
We are, Gov, we are. Let's get started. Kat Lou writes today, hello. I often ask, why does Joe Biden say, God bless our troops, or God bless America? I cannot believe that Joe Biden really wants God to bless America. If so, wouldn't he change his ways and obey?
Well, then, now that's a tough question. I'm not going to get into his heart or his motives, because I don't know what they are. I will simply say that I would hope that if he invokes the Lord, and I'm glad he's at least mentioning him, that he would come to the conclusion that God loves every human being from the point of conception, and that Joe Biden would repent of a very, to me, indefensible pro-abortion attitude. I can't understand that for sure.
Staying on that spiritual path, Trey Bratcher writes, how can we be better Christians throughout our lives day by day? I'd say probably especially in these times, right, Gov?
Yeah, it is hard. You know, let's be honest. It's hard to have a servant spirit, to have an unselfish heart. Those are the things that we really ought to focus on. And I say it's staying in the Word. You know, there's nothing that is more powerful than constantly comparing yourself to a standard to find out, are you living up to the standard? Now, if the standard is what someone else is doing, you'll always pick somebody that you're living a better life than, and you'll say, I'm doing great, because I just compared myself to this guy. And this guy that I will pick is somebody whose standard is low enough that I'll exceed it. Here's the standard: Jesus. That's the standard. Stay in the Word, make Jesus the example. He's the tuning fork. So don't tune your life to somebody who is out of tune. Tune your life to a person who is in complete tune. That's Jesus. He's the only one. And I would say that if you do that, you'll say, oh, I'm out of tune. It's not the others who are messed up, it's me. And I think that's how we start.
All right, good, Gov. Thanks. Rob Jacobs asked, do you foresee any positive things coming as far as the border, the bogus vax mandates, and lowering inflation? That's a loaded question.
I'm not seeing a whole lot of changes at the border, other than I think the Biden administration has begun to understand that it is out of control. They won't admit it, but they have made at least one major change in that they are now beginning to reinstitute the Remain in Mexico policy, which was a Trump policy, criticized at the time, but very effective in keeping people from just pouring over the border, claiming asylum, getting in, and then having dates set to come back and have a hearing, which obviously they never did, because they just said, oh, I'm in now, and they go all over the country, and that's the end of that. So maybe there's a little bit of improvement, but not an admission that we need to make fundamental changes, including the control of the border. As for inflation, my concern is that it only gets worse, because as long as the government is paying people to not work, we have a shortage of labor, and people who could be working but they're not, and we have a great demand for workers and nobody to fill those jobs. Be careful that you don't just look at unemployment numbers, because when a person takes himself or herself out of the workforce, they're no longer considered unemployed. That they don't show up on the figures anymore. So you may say, oh, there's only a 3% unemployment rating. But the question is, how many people are work eligible but choose not to work? That's your real number. And if you don't factor that in, you don't have a very good picture of what's happening. I want to show, this is a clip. This is Joe Biden. More than one occasion, he has forgotten the name of his own defense secretary. I want you to see this.
I want to thank all of our distinguished guests that are here today, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, the Secretary of the Secretary Austin.
Yep. Eventually it'll come to him. Look, we all have those moments, but he has one every time he speaks. That's the difference. If this happened once in a great while, you'd say, yeah, you know, it happens to all of us, even people much younger. But this happens every time he has a speech. And I want you to remember something. He's got a teleprompter. Everything he says is on a script. Joe Biden doesn't walk out, and hardly ever does he just make impromptu comments, because his staff is scared to death how that ends up. And so all he's got to do is read the script and read the name of the defense secretary, and he struggles to do it. Here is the deputy press secretary, which is Karine Jean-Pierre. And when asked by a reporter whether Joe Biden will choose Kamala as his running mate, I think she kind of mimics the Kamala cackle. Let's watch.
I can't speak to a conversation that the vice president and the president has. I could only say and reiterate what Jen has said and what the president has said himself, that he is planning to run for re-election in 2024. I don't have any more to add.
But just to be clear, when the president says he plans to run again, he means with Harris on the ticket?
Yes, he does. There's no change. Yes. Yes. Go ahead.
That's what's called a nervous laugh, which means you're laughing to cover for your being caught flat-footed in something. You're thinking, I don't know how to answer this. And that's why Kamala Harris cackles a lot, because it's when she's nervous and doesn't know how to answer the question, she laughs as if, let me just blow that off. And what she's really doing is she's buying herself some time, and she's trying to dismiss it, but the question was real. That's what it reveals. Pam, we getting some more questions?
We are indeed, in Gov. With confidence, people can like today. And of course, they are speaking with you live today.
Yes, they
right
are.
Here streaming from our theater here in Hendersonville, Tennessee. Like us, and don't forget to click on the bell there so you'll be reminded and notified whenever we are live like we are right now. Thanks to Jonathan for the super chat. He said, God bless you, Governor Mike Huckabee, for speaking the truth.
Well, thank you. Appreciate that, Jonathan.
Kimberly Lopez now is asking, why is it that the Amish have reached herd immunity and have not taken one shot? Can this be proof that natural immunity is better?
That's an interesting question. I don't honestly know the answer to that, so I'm not going to try to pretend that I do, and I'm not aware of those figures regarding the Amish community. They're a very close-knit community. They certainly practice very, I guess, wholesome and thoughtful patterns of behavior, but I was not aware that their infection rate was virtually zero.
Yeah.
That's interesting. It's news to me if that's the case. The one thing I think we do know is that there is some real confusion among the scientists about COVID. And let me give an example. This week, Dr. Fauci is saying that Americans can enjoy the Christmas holiday with their family, but only if you're vaccinated and if your family is vaccinated. This is what he says. Listen.
We can get through even a winter surge by implementing the countermeasures that we have: vaccinations, boosters, masking in indoor settings, being prudent in caring, for example, about wearing a mask indoors. You can enjoy the holiday season with your family if you're vaccinated and your family members are vaccinated.
So you can only enjoy the holidays if you're vaccinated and you wear a mask indoors. It's hard to enjoy your family if you happen to wear a mask indoors. And when I'm hugging my grandkids, I'm sorry, I ain't wearing a mask doing it. I'm just not, and they're not going to. This is a very different kind of perspective that Dr. Fauci is giving than some other people who are, I would say, clinicians, and these are people who actually see patients, because Fauci sees no patients. He is a doctor, but only in the government bureaucracy. He does not go up and down the halls of a hospital and read charts and see patients. But here's a doctor who does, and that's Dr. Marty Makary of Johns Hopkins School of Medicine. And his concern is that all of these lockdowns and the things that we're doing is having a much bigger negative effect on children than COVID. Watch this.
Brown University has a good study showing that kids who have been in school during the pandemic compared to kids who've been in school before the pandemic have more cognitive, motor, and learning deficits. This is a tragedy. It's uncharted territory. We're going to appreciate the downside of this far into the future. Young women have had a 51% increase in emergency room visits for self-inflicted harm.
That alone is a pretty shocking statement that Dr. Makary is making. By the way, I really like him. He's very smart. He's a great communicator as well. And again, a clinical practitioner at one of the leading medical facilities in the world, Johns Hopkins Medical School. And if you didn't catch totally what he said kids are experiencing significant cognitive and motor ability problems because they've been locked down and kept from other children and not been in their normal social settings. But the single most alarming thing that he mentioned was a 51% uptick in the number of young females who are going to the emergency room because they have self-harmed. That means they have done damage. They've either cut themselves or they've tried to kill themselves or they've over-medicated. 51% increase among young women because of the lockdowns of COVID. That is very, very concerning, and it's something that I hope people would take note of, and I would like to think that parents are starting to say to their school districts, our kids have got to go to school and they have to be able to interact. That's critically important. Speaking of interaction, we'd like for you to interact with us. How can you do that? It's not hard. Subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell, leave us a comment, tell us what you think. If there's a particular thing you want us to talk more about or less about, that's where you can let us know. Be sure to like the channel and to share it with other people. All of that is an important way that you and I can continue to connect. And I want to say thank you for joining us for our live chat. We are live from our TV studio in Hendersonville, Tennessee, right outside of Nashville. And Pam, I think there are more questions coming in.
Absolutely, their chance to talk to you live and in person. Jay Luther writes today, and this is referencing back when Sarah was in the White House, Gov. How long did Sarah go without giving a brief? It's some kind of record.
Oh, how long did she go without?
Yeah, without giving a brief. Did she?
It was pretty consistent until the point at which, when the White House got sued by Jim Acosta, or he filed a complaint because they finally just quit answering or calling on him. And he got all bent out of shape. You remember when he brushed against a reporter
Right.
a White House staffer, and it was pretty controversial. And the president himself came in. And so the president started doing a lot of the briefings. So there was a period where Sarah wasn't doing them as often, but it wasn't because the White House wasn't responding. It's that the president himself would go to the press room and take their questions. And the funny thing about that was, before they kept saying, when are we going to talk to the president more? Even though Donald Trump made himself available more to the press than any president in history. And they kept saying, we want to see him more. And then when he started coming, they said, we don't want to see him every day. We just want to have our briefings with the press secretary. So it's proof positive. The press is not interested in information, our accuracy, our access, none of that. They're interested in whining and being advocates for their side.
We still have a lot of questions, or room for questions, a lot of time on the clock still for folks to write in if they like. Let's go to Kimberly Lopez. To Jane Sullivan. Isn't there a constitutional safeguard that if Congress will not do anything about an incompetent president, that places the United States in danger? He's removed?
Well, the 25th Amendment is part of what could be the removal of a president. It's very difficult, and let's be very honest, it ought to be very difficult to remove a president. It shouldn't be because Congress wants to. Congress can only do it through an impeachment of the House, a trial in the Senate, and a 2/3 vote of the Senate to convict. By the way, the word impeachment does not mean removal. Impeachment is essentially an indictment. It means formal charges are filed. And under the Constitution, the House can issue articles of impeachment. Those are basically indictments and accusations formally raised. It then goes to the Senate. The Senate has a trial presided over by the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. Each senator votes, and then it is required for 2/3 of the Senate, which would be 67 votes, in order to remove the president, find him guilty and remove him. That's a huge, huge bar to clear. So that's not a likely one. The only other option is under the 25th Amendment. If there is there's a meeting of the members of the cabinet and they declare that the president is incompetent or is incapable of serving, they can make that recommendation that the president is taken down. But remember, these are people who are appointed by the president. It's very unlikely that they're going to step in and do that unless it is very severe. Let's say the president has a debilitating stroke and he's still alive, but he actually is not functioning anymore. Then maybe under those conditions it would happen. It's not going to happen because they just don't like what he's doing or because they think that he's really no longer up to the task. They at that point may say to his family, to his staff, would you please convince the president he needs to resign? But again, that's probably not going to happen. It's a very difficult thing. And I want to be on record as saying it ought to be difficult because you don't want the American people to elect somebody and then a handful of 10 people saying, yeah, we want to get rid of him. And you certainly don't want to make it easy for the legislative branch to overthrow a president who was elected by the people, even if it's Joe Biden. So I want to be clear on that. That's not the likely way that things play out.
All right, Jay Luther writes, and I haven't confirmed these percentages, Governor, but he says 26% GOP, 26% Democratic, and 46% Independent is the demographic of Americans, wondering why so few are party affiliated.
I'm not familiar with those numbers, and I don't know what that's from. 26, and 40. I'm just not sure. So I'm not saying that's not correct. But I've not seen it that way. I think there's a larger percentage of people who identify with one of the other parties and a lower percentage of people who are independent. But, you know, I could be wrong. I never have been before, but it could be that today is the first day of my entire life when I am. Send, if you would, I would just appreciate not questioning you, but I'd like to look it up and see where did that information come from, the 26, and 46, because I've just not seen it.
Okay, Truth Matters writes, so why are we being lied to? It appears that we don't have a government anymore. Please explain, if you can.
I'm not sure if I understand the question fully. Why do we not have a government? We have one. It's just incompetent. And it's, I think the reason it's incompetent, it's failing to follow the very clear dictates of the Constitution. Let me say the most fundamental thing about our form of government is that you have three equal branches of government: the executive, the legislative, and the judicial. And one branch cannot act independently of the other two. That is a design that the founders put in place so that you couldn't have a runaway branch of government doing things and not having accountability. So basically you have to have two of the three branches of government in agreement. Even the Supreme Court, I see people will say when the Supreme Court comes out with a ruling, well, the Supreme Court just ruled, now it is the law of the land. And I say, no, it isn't. They can't make a law. There's only one branch of government that can make a law. That would be the legislative branch. The president can't make a law. The president signs a law that he agrees with. That's his function. And then he carries it out. That's what he does. He executes the law, carries it out. Executive branch, legislative branch deliberates, decides, creates the law that he signs. And then the purpose of the judiciary is to interpret, to make sure that that law is consistent with the Constitution and the existing laws. And if it is, they affirm it. If it isn't, then they overturn it. But that doesn't mean that the effect of it is immediate. Why do I say that? And a lot of people think it is. And I've had this argument with people, even folks who've gone to law school. But if you have 9 people, in fact, you don't have to have all 9, 5 of the 9 who just decide on any given day that they don't like a law, do they get to overturn the combined will of the representatives elected by the people of America to 100 Senate seats and 435 House seats and to an elected president? I mean, we think of the courts having a lot of power. They don't have that much power. It was never given to them. They only have the power to suggest. And if they so rule, what constitutionally happens is then the legislature has to craft a law that is consistent with the Supreme Court ruling. If they don't, then the court's ruling has no effect. That goes back to my point. You can't have one branch of government making a decision that imposes on the other two. If the courts rule it, then the legislature rewrites the law. Now you have two, and hopefully the executive branch will sign it. But if you don't, even then, you don't have a law unless they decide to impeach the president for not following it. I don't mean to be confusing, but I hope I'm helping you to see logically the reason the founders put this in was to protect you, the American people, so that you didn't have tyranny from just a handful of people, not one president, not 5 justices, or not even from a Congress full of hotheads. You just can't do that. And it's how we protected our government. And if we ever lose that, we basically lost the country.
Governor Terrence Rahm is asking, how would a constitutional convention of states work?
Under Article 5 of the Constitution, you can have a convention of the states when there are 37 states who call for a convention. And when that happens, that means that the legislature in each of those 37 states refer for a constitutional convention or convention of the states. Specific items are put on that agenda. For example, I'm on the National Steering Committee, just for full disclosure, for a balanced budget amendment to the Constitution. We already have 32 states who have enacted that, who have proposed a balanced budget amendment. 5 more, and there will be a convention of states, and legislatures will send delegates, and they will determine whether or not we should have a balanced budget to the Constitution. If those 37 states ratify it, then it goes to form of a vote for the people, and when that happens, then we have a balanced budget to the Constitution. By the way, this is the only way we're ever going to see term limits, the only way we're ever going to see a balanced budget amendment, because Congress will never do it to themselves. And so that's why I personally support invoking something that has been in the Constitution since its founding, since its original content, and that's a convention of the states.
How does an American or someone who's watching today, Governor, get involved with Convention of States? How do they do that today?
Well, they can go to the Balanced Budget Amendment Committee. There's a website. You Google it and you'll find that. So there's some ways to do it, or you can talk to your own state legislature and ask in your state, have they ratified or have they recommended for that? So I hope people will. Well, we're about to run out of time. Before we do, I want to let you know that we have launched our very own Huckabee Show merchandise store. Now, what does that mean? Well, you can get some pretty awesome Huckabee Show hats, shirts, mugs, and even more. And we got people designing some more great items for the future as well. I'm very proud to say that every single item in the store is 100% American made. All the profits go back into programming here on TBN. I don't get a penny of it. And unless Pam has made a side deal, she doesn't either.
No, I haven't.
It goes back into the network so that you get more great programming here on the network. If you want to check it out, go to Huckabee.tv, click on the shop button at the top of the page, and as we say, proceeds go to TBN. We are so glad that you have joined us today. I hope you'll leave other questions in the comments section. If you haven't already, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell. And we want to say thanks for joining us. Now, I told you a little bit about the show when we got started today. Here's a little more, and I hope you will not miss this weekend's very special edition of The Huckabee Show.
This week on Huckabee, former Trump Chief of Staff Mark Meadows, hilarious columnist Ron Hart,
$2,000 are charging them to fly out of Afghanistan, $3,000 if you want to be inside the plane.
comedian Jeff Wayne, and Point of Grace performs. Watch Huckabee on Saturday at 8, 7 Central, and again on Sunday at 9, 8 Central, right here on TBN.